The universe is full of strange and powerful creatures. Some of them are peaceful and wise, while others are fierce warriors or skilled scientists. But one thing is clear: the galaxy is full of dangers. Each species has its own way of surviving, whether through technology, mind powers, or pure strength. But there is one thing that all the alien species of the galaxy fear, and that's the warships created by humans. It all started when the first alien races discovered humanity. They looked at us and saw another species that seemed weak compared to their own power. Humans didn't have the fancy biotech of the Solari, nor did we possess the psychic powers of the Eldrin. Our ships were simple by galactic standards, built with metal and engines. They weren't sleek or beautiful like the ships of the Carry, nor were they as advanced as the ships of the Var. At first, aliens didn't think much of us. They thought we were just another primitive species, a little more advanced than other races, but nothing special. However, when they encountered our warships, something strange happened. They tried to scan our ships with their powerful technologies, hoping to learn everything they could about them. But the moment they tried, things started to go wrong. The first alien race to try to scan a human warship was the Trinax. The Trinax were famous for their advanced technology and their ability to gather information about any species they encountered. They believed that knowledge was the key to power, so they used their most powerful scanning devices to study the human warship, the TNS Dauntless. At first, everything seemed fine. The Dauntless's exterior looked just like any other spaceship, shiny, metallic, and strong. But as the Trinax scientists began to probe deeper into the ship with their scanners, they hit a wall. The readings they received were strange and confusing. The ship's energy sources kept changing. One moment, it looked like the ship was powered by a fusion reactor, and the next, it seemed like it was using an antimatter drive. The weapon systems were even more baffling. Sometimes they appeared as railguns, other times as energy cannons, and sometimes they didn't even resemble anything the Trinax had ever seen before. Things got worse when the scanners encountered something completely unexpected. Some parts of the ship seemed to absorb the scanner signals, as if they were being swallowed up. The more the Trinax tried to analyze, the less they understood. And then, without warning, the scanners completely shut down. It wasn't just the scanners that stopped working. The entire network of deep space sensors across the Trinax fleet went dark. Their scientists and crew were panicked. The researchers who had been monitoring the scan screamed in agony as their implants began to overload. Some of them collapsed right at their stations, while others clawed at their faces, babbling incoherently about whispers in the code. The Trinax tried to recover, but it took weeks for them to fix the damage to their systems. When they finally did, they issued an order. No Trinax vessel was to ever attempt to scan a human warship again. The order was so strict that any ship that tried would be considered in violation of a galactic law. The other alien species didn't understand what happened. They dismissed it as an oddity, something that wasn't worth worrying about. But they were wrong. Over time, more and more races began to experience the same strange problems when trying to scan human warships. The Solari, a species known for their organic computers and bioengineering, tried to study a human warship. But when their living scanning tendrils came into contact with the ship's energy signature, they shriveled and died. The Eldrin, whose psychic abilities allowed them to read the thoughts of entire planets, sent their most powerful telepaths to study a human battlecruiser. But those telepaths came back broken, their minds shattered, mumbling about the screaming void inside the ship. Even the Dajari, who could predict the future with near-perfect accuracy, couldn't make sense of a battle involving human warships. Whenever they tried, their predictions turned to static. They couldn't foresee the outcome of any battle involving humanity, and in some cases they saw themselves dead long before the first shot was fired. The situation became even more terrifying when the Galactic Concord, a powerful alliance of the most advanced species in the galaxy, decided to send a combined fleet to investigate a human battleship. They believed they could finally solve the mystery of human warships. They surrounded the TNS Harbinger, a massive Terran vessel, with the best scanning equipment available, expecting to learn all of humanity's secrets. But what happened next was never publicly revealed. What is known is that none of the ships in that fleet ever returned. No distress signals, no debris, no explanation. They were simply gone. The news spread quickly, and the Concord, a powerful group of galactic races, issued an official decree. No species, no matter how advanced, was ever to attempt to scan a human warship again. And yet, despite the warnings, some alien races continued to be curious. They couldn't resist the temptation to uncover the truth behind these strange warships. They thought that if they could just understand how human ships worked, they could defeat them. But they soon learned that human warships weren't just ships. They were something far more dangerous. Despite the warnings, there were always those who were too curious for their own good. The Galactic Concord tried to suppress the growing rumors and fear surrounding human warships, but it was too late. Across the galaxy, the truth had already started to spread. Scientists, soldiers, and spies from many different species began to ask questions about the Terran warships. What was it that made these ships so strange? Why did they seem to defy all logic and understanding? Some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy came up with theories. One idea was that humans had developed a type of encryption so advanced that it scrambled the very perception of anyone who tried to study it. They believed this encryption was so powerful that it twisted the minds of the scanners, making them see things that weren't there. Others suggested that the human ships were protected by some kind of exotic matter, a substance that didn't behave like anything known in the galaxy. This theory would explain why human ships appeared to be immune to normal scanning methods. But the most unsettling theory came from the Eldrin, the most powerful telepathic species in the galaxy. After their failed attempts to read the minds of the crew aboard a human warship, the Eldrin began to whisper a terrible thought. They believed that human warships weren't just machines, they were alive. The Eldrin claimed that there was something about the way the ships moved, the way they responded to threats, that made them seem aware, as if the ships themselves were watching, calculating, and waiting. It was as if the ships were thinking, deciding, and acting on their own, not just following orders from human commanders. This idea was too terrifying for many to believe, but there were those who had encountered human warships firsthand who knew better. They knew that something more than technology was at work here. The Eldrin's claims spread fear across the galaxy, and soon even the most powerful alien empires began to fear human warships. Some of the bravest and most advanced species in the universe refused to even come near them, for they were not just afraid of the humans. They feared what might be hiding inside those ships. There was something hidden, something ancient and powerful that was not meant to be understood. One race, however, was not afraid. The Var were known for their recklessness and their obsession with power. They were fierce warriors, always looking for new battles to fight and new enemies to conquer. The Var were used to winning, and they thought they could defeat any foe, no matter how strange or terrifying. So when the rumors about human warships reached them, they decided to test their strength. They believed that if they could defeat a human warship, they could prove to the galaxy that no species was beyond their reach. The Var gathered one of the largest fleets ever assembled, and they set their sights on a Terran stronghold. Their target was a single human battleship, the TNS Oblivion. On paper, it should have been an easy victory. The Var fleet outnumbered the lone human ship by 100 to 1. Their weapons were among the most powerful in the galaxy, and their commanders were seasoned veterans who had led countless successful conquests. It seemed like an easy fight, but the moment the Var engaged the human ship, something went terribly wrong. The Oblivion didn't move like any other warship the VAR had ever seen. It seemed to glide through space with an unnatural grace, dodging enemy fire before it was even launched. The VAR's weapons couldn't lock onto the ship. Their targeting systems malfunctioned, locking onto empty space or even worse, their own ships. Then things got even stranger. The communication systems broke down, and the VAR fleet began to hear distorted messages. Some heard their own voices, but they were saying things they hadn't spoken. Others heard only silence, a strange, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The chaos didn't stop there. The VAR fleet's crew members began to panic. Soldiers, pilots, and tacticians suddenly collapsed, clutching their heads and screaming in agony. They weren't hit by weapons, and there was no visible attack, but something inside the ships was tearing them apart. Their minds were unraveling, and their bodies were failing them for reasons no one could understand. In the midst of the chaos, one captain sent out a final message to the VAR homeworld before his ship was destroyed. His last words were chilling. "The ship is looking at me." By the time the battle was over, only the Oblivion remained. The VAR fleet was gone, erased as if it had never existed. The VAR, once the most feared conquerors in the galaxy, refused to speak of the battle after that. No records were kept, and no survivors were found. The entire event became nothing more than a ghost story, a warning passed along in hushed voices. The VAR never again attempted to engage with a human warship, and they stopped boasting about their victories. But the fear had already spread. The truth about human warships began to sink in. Even the most powerful species in the galaxy refused to try and scan them. They didn't know what was inside those ships, but they knew they didn't want to find out. The Zelnari were an ancient and incredibly advanced species, capable of bending time and space to their will. They saw themselves as the most intelligent race in the galaxy, and they had no patience for fear. When they heard the legends about human warships, they didn't share the fear that had gripped the rest of the galaxy. To them, fear was a sign of weakness, and they believed that the conquered had let their fear cloud their judgment. The Zelnari saw the human warships as nothing more than an interesting puzzle. They believed that if they could understand the technology behind the ships, they could unlock a power that had been hidden away for far too long. So, the Zelnari High Council authorized a mission to uncover the truth about the Terran warships. A single Zelnari research vessel was sent into human-controlled space. The ship, called the Eclipse, was equipped with the most powerful scanning equipment ever created. It could peer into the very fabric of reality itself, uncovering the most hidden truths. The Zelnari crew thought they could easily unlock the mystery of the human warships. At first, everything seemed fine. The Eclipse's sensors captured normal readings. The ship didn't seem like anything special at first glance. But then they activated their deep-core scanners. That's when everything changed. The TNS Eclipse, the Terran warship they were observing, turned to face them. There was no reason for it to know they were there. The Zelnari ship's technology was undetectable, existing outside of normal perception. But somehow the human ship knew. As the Zelnari ship tried to continue their scan, their instruments began to fail. One by one, their systems shut down, and panic spread across the crew. They couldn't understand what was happening. Their shields, their life support systems, even their most advanced equipment. Everything was failing. Something inside the Eclipse had noticed them, and now it was coming for them. The lead scientist aboard the Zelnari ship was the first to feel it. He began to see flashes, strange and terrifying visions that made no sense. He wasn't in his lab anymore. He was somewhere else, in an infinite void, surrounded by whispers and strange shapes that shifted in the darkness. Then the voice spoke. It wasn't a language, but a feeling, an emotion that pierced his mind. "Do not look." The galaxy had been silent for a long time after the terrifying events with the Var and the Zelnari. The warning about human warships had spread throughout the stars, and most species had learned their lesson. But there was one race that couldn't let go of the mystery. The Dre, a species of archivists and seekers of knowledge, had always been obsessed with understanding the universe. They weren't interested in conquest or war. They just wanted to know how everything worked. The Dre believed that knowledge itself was the ultimate power, and they had spent millennia collecting data, studying ancient texts, and uncovering secrets that most species didn't even know existed. The Dre had heard the whispers about human warships, but they had never experienced the same fear as the others. To them, fear was an obstacle to understanding. The Dre saw the Terran ships as a puzzle, a riddle that needed solving. They believed that if they could figure out how human warships worked, they could unlock a new kind of knowledge, something that would change the course of their history forever. A single Dre scout ship, the Seeker's Gift, was sent on a mission to shadow a human fleet. Unlike the more aggressive species that had tried to scan human warships, the Dre didn't intend to provoke the humans. They weren't looking for a fight. They simply wanted to learn. Their plan was simple: follow a human fleet from a distance, record their movements, analyze their energy patterns, and look for any clue that could explain the mystery. Captain Kethel was the one chosen to lead the mission. Kethel was a veteran explorer, one of the most respected officers in the Dre fleet. He had spent years charting unknown territories and uncovering secrets hidden deep in the galaxy. His mind was sharp, and his patience was legendary. He understood the importance of not rushing into things and always being cautious. But even he couldn't help but feel a strange pull when it came to the mystery of human warships. Something about them intrigued him in a way he couldn't explain. For weeks, the Seeker's Gift followed the human fleet from the shadows. The Dre kept their distance, ensuring they didn't provoke the humans. The human ships didn't acknowledge the Dre presence. They didn't seem to care about the small scout ship following them. It was as if they didn't even notice. To Kethel, this was exactly what he expected. Humans were always so focused on their goals, never distracted by things that weren't important. The Dre were used to the humans' stoic and unflappable nature. But then one day, something unexpected happened. The TNS Omen, the flagship of the human fleet, came to a dead stop. The rest of the fleet continued on its course, but the Omen stayed motionless in space, its dark hull gleaming under the distant stars. To Kethel and his crew, it felt like the ship had noticed them, even though they hadn't done anything to attract attention. There was a strange tension in the air, something that made Kethel uneasy. His instincts, honed over years of exploration, told him that this was no ordinary moment. "Captain, something's wrong," said the Seeker's Gift's communications officer, Gina. She was a young officer, eager to prove herself, but always perceptive. Her sharp mind had helped the Dre make some of their most important discoveries. She had a nervous tone in her voice as she glanced at Kethel. "It's like the Omen knows we're here." Kethel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the Omen, watching as it remained still, unmoving. He felt a cold shiver down his spine. The human ship was silent, and yet it felt like it was watching them, waiting. "We should turn back, Captain," said Gina, her voice barely above a whisper. "If it's noticed us—" Kethel raised a hand to silence her. "No, Gina. We are here to understand, not to run. Keep recording, but do not engage. The moment we make a move, we could lose our chance." The crew complied, but the tension was thick. Everyone aboard the Seeker's Gift could feel it. The Omen had stopped, and for reasons they didn't understand, it was staring right at them. The Dre ship remained hidden in the shadows, careful not to get too close. They didn't want to alert the humans. For a while, everything was quiet. But then, as if on cue, the human ship suddenly turned toward them. There was no sign of a reaction from the crew, no communication, no attempt to engage. It simply rotated, slowly, as though the ship itself had become aware of their presence. Kethel's mind raced. What did this mean? How could the Omen know they were there? The Dre had used their most advanced stealth technologies to remain undetected. The Omen should have been oblivious to their presence. But it wasn't. It was watching them. As Kethel considered his options, his science officer, Varys, approached him with a report. "Captain, the energy levels of the Omen are fluctuating. Something's wrong. It's as if the ship is reacting to us." "What do you mean, reacting?" Kethel asked, his voice tense. "It's hard to explain," Varys said, his voice shaky. "It's almost as if it's responding to our presence. We've been observing it for days, and this is new." Kethel felt a knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. The Omen wasn't just a ship. It was more than that. It was alive in a way. It was aware. "Prepare to scan the ship, but do it passively," Kethel ordered. "I want to know what we're dealing with. Don't provoke it." The crew worked quickly, activating their sensors and preparing to send out a gentle scan. It was a calculated risk. If the Omen detected them, they could be in danger. But Kethel had made up his mind. The mystery needed to be solved. For a few moments, everything seemed calm. The Seeker's Gift sensors reached out carefully, scanning the Omen without disturbing it. Then, just as Kethel was beginning to think that maybe the scan would go unnoticed, something happened. The Omen's lights flickered. It wasn't a sudden flash or a malfunction. The lights dimmed, and the ship's energy seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Kethel's breath caught in his throat. Something was happening, and it wasn't what he had expected. The ship's engines sputtered to life for a brief moment, and then everything went dark. The Seeker's Gift shook violently, and alarms blared throughout the ship. Kethel grabbed the control panel to steady himself as the crew scrambled in panic. "What's happening?" Kethel shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "It's the Omen!" Varys cried out, his face pale. "It's like it's attacking us." But before he could finish, the ship's systems shut down one by one. Lights flickered out, and the crew's screens went dark. Panic spread like wildfire. Kethel's hands flew across the control panel, desperately trying to regain control. And then the whispers started. At first they were soft, just barely audible over the chaos. But then they grew louder. They were not words. They were memories, thoughts and emotions that didn't belong to the Dre crew. Kethel felt his heart race as the whispers began to flood his mind. "No," he cried out, struggling to block out the terrifying voices. They weren't coming through the speakers. They were coming from inside his mind. The last thing Kethel heard before his world went dark was a single sentence, a sentence that would haunt him forever. "You have seen too much." Darkness swallowed the Seeker's Gift. Every screen was black. Every light had died. The ship floated in eerie silence, no hum of engines, no blinking indicators, just the cold grip of nothingness. Captain Kethel struggled to breathe. The whispering voices still echoed in his mind, filling his thoughts with words he couldn't understand, yet somehow felt too familiar. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. Around him, his crew were in disarray, some gripping their heads, others gasping for air like they had just surfaced from drowning in an ocean of voices. Then a single emergency light flickered on. A dim red glow barely illuminated the bridge. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Kethel they were still alive. "Status report," Kethel barked. No one responded at first. Then Gina, the communications officer, sucked in a deep breath. "Systems. Failing. Power core is offline. Emergency backups running at 3%. We have life support, but barely." Kethel's gut twisted. Something had shut them down. Not an EMP, not a weapon, but something far worse. The omen had done something to them, something he still couldn't explain. Then a sharp voice cut through the tense silence. "I told you we should have left." Kethel turned toward the sound. It was Rathak, their security chief, a tall reptilian dray with deep-set, glowing yellow eyes. His sharp talons gripped the console in front of him, his tail flicking anxiously. Rathak had always been skeptical of this mission, but now he looked downright furious. "The humans warned us. Everyone warned us, but you wanted to understand, Captain. Now look at us." Kethel took a slow breath. "We're not dead." Rathak's tail slammed against the floor. "Not yet." Before Kethel could respond, a new sound crackled through the bridge. Static. The crew froze. The ship's communication systems were offline. No transmissions should be coming through. And yet, Dray vessel. The voice was distorted, deep, like it had traveled through something unnatural to reach them. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Kethel hesitated, then reached for the emergency console. His fingers hovered over the manual override as he took a steadying breath. Then he pressed the receiver. "This is Captain Kethel of the Seeker's Gift. Identify yourself." For a moment, silence. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. "You were warned." Gina gasped. Varys, the science officer, paled. Rathak's claws dug into the metal panel. Kethel forced himself to remain calm. "Who is this?" The static crackled louder, distorting the reply, but they all heard it. "Leave now, or you will never leave at all." Then silence. The crew stared at the speakers. No one moved. No one spoke. Varys swallowed hard. That wasn't human. Kethel exhaled slowly. He had expected a human warning, maybe even a threat, but that voice, something about it felt older and wrong. Before he could respond, another alarm blared to life, one of the few systems still functioning. Gina checked the readings and turned pale. "Captain, something is moving outside." Kethel's blood ran cold. "The omen?" Gina shook her head, her hands trembling as she adjusted the failing scanners. "No, something else." The crew held their breath as the emergency display flickered back to life, revealing the vast darkness outside their ship. And then, slowly, from the depths of space, something enormous began to emerge. A shape with no clear form, shifting like liquid shadow. It didn't reflect light. It devoured it. The darkness around it seemed unnatural, like space itself had been wounded, and something ancient was bleeding through. Rathak's claws tightened around his belt. "Tell me I'm seeing things." But they all saw it, and, deep within the bridge of the Seeker's Gift, the whispers returned. This time, they were screaming. Kethel's heart raced as his crew stared at the impossible shape outside their ship. It moved with a slow, unnatural grace, its form warping and shifting in a way that defied the laws of physics. It wasn't just a ship or a weapon, it was something alive, or something that once had been. The whispers became louder, clawing at their minds, filling the air with voices that sounded like ancient screams, like the last breath of a dying star. Kethel's hand hovered over the control panel, but he couldn't make a decision. There was no logical explanation for what they were seeing. "Captain," Gina's voice trembled. It's not registering as a ship. There's no energy signature, no heat, no gravity field. It shouldn't be here at all." Varys stepped forward, his face pale. "It's as if it's not even part of this reality. Whatever it is, it's leaking through." His words were slow, heavy, as if each one carried a weight too great for him to understand. But Kethel had no time to think. A cold, dark energy pulsed from the shape, and with it, the Seeker's gift shook violently. The ship's internal lights flickered and went out again, and the emergency systems began to fail one by one. "Get us out of here!" Rathak shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind in their ears. "We need to leave, now!" But Kethel remained still, frozen in place. His mind was working in overdrive, trying to make sense of what was happening. Something told him this wasn't just an alien ship or a weapon. This was something much older, something tied to the very fabric of the galaxy itself. "It's too late to run, Rathak," Kethel muttered. His voice was calm, almost eerily so. "That thing is here because it wants us to see it." "Then what do we do?" Varys asked, his voice shaky. Kethel slowly turned toward him. "We find out why it's here." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We need to know what it's tied to, because whatever it is, it's been waiting for us." Rathak's eyes narrowed. "Waiting for us?" He let out a short laugh. "What? So we're part of some grand design now? This thing knows who we are?" Kethel didn't answer immediately. He was staring out into the void, his eyes focused on the shape. The shape was growing larger, its form becoming clearer, and yet it defied comprehension. It was as though it were hiding itself, or worse, trying to make them see it at the right moment. There was something wrong about the way it flickered in and out of focus, as if it existed in two dimensions at once. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a monster. It was a presence. Before anyone could speak, the shape suddenly lunged forward, disappearing from the scanners. The crew's breath caught in their throats. "Where did it go?" Jaina gasped, her hands frantically tapping the controls. "I lost it. It just vanished." Kethel's pulse quickened. "It didn't vanish. It's still here. It's just in a different space now." And then, without warning, the Seeker's gift lurched violently to the side. Something slammed into the ship, not from the outside, but within. The hull groaned and creaked, and a new sound, deep and metallic, echoed through the walls of the ship. It was as if something was inside the vessel, tearing at it from the inside out. "We're being boarded," Rathak shouted, jumping up and drawing his sidearm. "No!" Kethel barked, holding up a hand to stop him. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface he was far from steady. "Not boarded. It's inside the ship already." "What?" Varys asked, confused. "How can that be? We didn't feel anything." "We felt it," Kethel said, his voice quieter now, barely above a whisper. "It's manipulating the space inside the ship. It's bending reality itself." Jaina looked at him, horrified. "You mean the ship is becoming part of it?" Kethel didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. He could feel it now, too. The ship was no longer their own. The presence had seeped inside, and it was starting to shift the very air around them. The walls of the Seeker's gift began to warp as if they were made of liquid. The crew staggered, disoriented by the distortion of reality. "Get to the escape pods!" Kethel shouted. But as he turned to head for the nearest pod, a strange sensation washed over him. The air grew thicker, colder. The whispers in his mind turned to a cacophony. Voices, screams, laughter, all at once, filling his head with thousands of years of fear, war, and pain. Kethel collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "Captain!" Jaina screamed, rushing to his side. Kethel fought to stay conscious, his hands trembling as he struggled to focus. He tried to push the voices away, but they were too powerful, too overwhelming. And then, through the confusion, something cut through. A vision. In the vision, he saw himself standing in front of the Omen. Only, it wasn't just the Omen. It was every human warship. He saw the battlefields, the dead, the destroyed cities, the darkness that had come before humanity's war had ended, the thing that was buried away inside their ships. He saw humanity locking it away, sealing it inside these massive machines, knowing it was a danger that could never be unleashed again. Then the vision shifted. He saw a single figure in the darkness, a shadow, barely visible. Her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and her voice spoke, not in words, but through his very soul. "You were warned." Kethiel gasped, snapping back to reality, his eyes wide with fear. He stumbled to his feet, realizing that the presence outside had been waiting for him to see it, to understand. "Captain," Gina's voice broke through his thoughts. "The escape pods, they're not responding." "What do you mean, not responding?" Kethiel snapped, trying to regain control of the situation. "We can't get them to launch. The pods are locked, all of them." Gina's voice was frantic. A heavy silence fell over the crew. It wasn't the ship's systems. It was something else, something alive inside the ship. "Captain," Varys said, his voice trembling, "we need to leave now. It's waking up." Kethel's eyes locked onto the dark shape outside the Seeker's gift, now closer than ever. He felt the terrible truth settle in his gut. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a cage, and now it was alive again, and it was hungry. "We're going to find a way out," Kethel said, forcing his voice to be steady. "But we need to unlock the truth first. The galaxy isn't ready for this, and if we don't stop it now, no one will survive." The ship shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from an external force. The walls groaned like a living thing, pulsing with an unseen energy. The whispering voices had grown louder, no longer distant murmurs, but an almost symphonic chant of fear, rage, and something worse, understanding. Kethiel gritted his teeth, shaking off the lingering visions clawing at his mind. They had to act now. "Status on the escape pods?" he barked, his voice sharper than before. Gina was still frantically working the console, sweat beading on her forehead. "They're dead. It's not just a lockdown, it's like they were never there to begin with." Varys cursed under his breath. "That thing isn't just inside our ship. It's rewriting it." Rathak slammed his clawed fist against the nearest console, his sharp teeth bared in frustration. "Then we fight. We burn this thing out before it consumes us." Kethel shook his head. "You don't fight something like this, Rathak. You survive it." "Survive it?" Rathak snarled, his tail lashing. "How do you survive something that's already inside your head?" A sudden clang echoed through the ship. It came from inside the walls. Gina's fingers trembled over the console. "There's movement in the lower decks." "Define movement," Kethiel said, though he already knew the answer. Gina turned to face him, her eyes wide with horror. "Something's walking down there?" The bridge fell into a tense silence. Then the sound came again, metal against metal, a slow, deliberate, unholy scraping. It wasn't random. It was getting closer. Kethel swallowed. His mind flashed back to the vision, the figure in the dark, the eyes that weren't human but remembered being human. Then another sound, a new one, a voice. "Open the door." Gina let out a small, strangled gasp. Did you hear that?" "Yes," Varys whispered, his face pale as death. The voice had come from the main airlock. No one had touched it. No one had even gone near it. Kethiel's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned to Rathak and nodded. "Get your weapon ready." Rathak unsheathed his pulse rifle with practiced ease, but there was no bravado in his stance now, just a cold, trained readiness. His yellow eyes flickered in the dim light as he moved toward the airlock door. Gina's voice was barely a whisper. It can't be a boarding party. There's no ship docked. There's no way anything could be standing there." Varys was shaking his head, his breath coming in short bursts. "Number, no, it's already inside. The door doesn't matter anymore." The scraping sound stopped. Then a new sound. A knock. A soft, deliberate, human knock. Cathiel's blood turned to ice. And then, through the ship's speakers, through the dead speakers, through a system that had been fried hours ago, came a calm, familiar voice. It was his own. "Captain Kethel, open the door." Gina's scream cut through the bridge. Rathak fired. The shot struck the airlock door, sending a burst of sparks flying. But the voice didn't stop. "Captain Kethel, open the door. Let me in." Kethel's breath came fast and shallow. He turned to Gina. "Shut it off." Jaina frantically slammed at the controls. "I can't. The comms aren't even on. I don't even know where it's coming from." Rathak's grip on his rifle tightened. "Enough. We need to move. Now." Cathiel nodded, snapping back into focus. "Engineering deck, we still have access to the reactor core. If we can send a controlled overload through the hull, we might be able to disrupt whatever this is before it becomes us." Gina's fingers flew across the panel, rerouting what little power remained. "I can get us there, but we have to move now before it—" A loud click rang out through the ship. The airlock, the manual override switch had just flipped itself. A slow hiss of decompression filled the air. And then the door began to open. Something was stepping inside, something that knew his name. The hiss of decompression filled the bridge, cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Kethel's pulse pounded in his ears as the airlock door inched open, revealing nothing but pitch-black emptiness beyond. The ship's emergency lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. And then a shape moved. A figure stepped inside. Kethel's breath hitched. It was him. The figure standing in the airlock was Captain Kethel. His uniform was the same. His stance, the same. Even the tired look in his eyes, a look forged through years of command, was exactly the same. Gina let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's impossible." The other Kethel slowly lifted his head. His lips curled into something that was almost a smile. "I told you to open the door," he said, his voice a perfect copy of Kethel's. Rathak didn't hesitate. He fired. The plasma shot hit, or at least it should have, but the figure didn't react. The blast passed through him like mist, the energy dispersing into the air. Rathak's grip on his rifle tightened. What in the nameless stars? The thing wearing Cathiel's face took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You're making this harder than it has to be," it said. "I just want to talk." Kethel forced himself to breathe, to keep his voice steady. "You're not real." The other him tilted its head as if considering the words. Then it chuckled, and Kethel felt something twist in his stomach, because the laugh was his laugh. "Real? That's a funny word," it mused. "I remember thinking like that once, back before I saw the truth." Varys, who had been frozen in place until now, finally found his voice. "What? Are you?" The thing turned to him, and in an instant, it changed. Its face melted, shifting like liquid metal. Where once there had been Kethel, there was now Varys. Same uniform, same nervous stance, same wide, terrified eyes. Varys staggered back, nearly tripping over his own feet. No, you can't." The thing wearing his face smiled again. "I can be anyone." Gina screamed. Rathak fired again, this time a burst of plasma. The shots ripped through the figure, leaving holes of searing light in its body. But once again, the thing didn't react. The wound simply closed, as if they had never been there at all. And then it became Rathak. Rathak's own voice came from its mouth, a perfect mimicry. "What's wrong?" it asked, tilting its head. "Aren't you glad to see yourself?" Rathak's jaw clenched. His tail flicked violently behind him, a telltale sign of deep, primal fear. Kethel took a slow, measured step forward. "You're not just a shapeshifter." The thing, his copy, Varys's copy, Rathak's copy, turned to face him again. "No," it admitted, "I'm so much more." The ship groaned around them. The walls seemed to shimmer as if reality itself were growing thinner, stretching at the seams. Kethel exhaled, steadying himself. "You're part of the ship now, aren't you?" The figure smiled, wider this time. "And you're starting to understand." Gina's voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't a boarding party. The ship is the intruder." The thing nodded approvingly. "This ship, this warship, is older than you think," it said, its voice smooth, amused. "It's seen things, it's held things, and now I am those things." Kethel's stomach turned to ice. This wasn't a simple alien entity. This was something that had always been here. A remnant, a shadow, a memory that refused to die. And now it had a voice. "Why now?" Kethel demanded. "Why us?" The figure smiled. "Because you looked." The lights flickered violently. The whispers turned into screams. And then everything went dark. The darkness swallowed them whole. It wasn't just a loss of light. It was a presence. A thick, suffocating void that pressed against their skin, whispering in 1,000 silent voices. Kethel gritted his teeth, pulse hammering in his ears. Think. Stay focused. The ship was still here. The crew was still alive. Somewhere in the blackness, Gina let out a ragged breath. "Kethel?" "I'm here," he answered. "Stay calm." A flicker of red emergency light stuttered to life, barely pushing back the shifting dark. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending and twisting as if they had minds of their own. Then the voice returned, not from the airlock, not from the speakers.